In the harsh winter of 1923, rural Montana, Eleanor Whitfield, a 35-year-old widow struggling to maintain her late husband's farm, discovers a mysterious injured stranger in her barn during a blizzard. The man, who calls himself Gabriel, appears to be fleeing from something dangerous. As Eleanor nurses him back to health, she uncovers that Gabriel is actually Prince Gabriel Alexandrov, the presumed dead heir to a fallen European kingdom, carrying ancient royal artifacts and a secret that could restore a lost dynasty. But with assassins closing in and a love growing between them, Eleanor must decide whether to help Gabriel reclaim his throne or convince him that sometimes the greatest kingdom is the one you build with someone who sees you for who you truly are, not what crown you wear. The lantern flickered against the barn wall, casting dancing shadows that made Eleanor Whitfield's hands tremble as she pressed the barrel of her late husband's rifle against the stranger's temple. Blood seeped through his torn coat, staining the hay beneath him crimson, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, held no fear. Instead, they gazed at her with a recognition that sent chills down her spine, as if he'd been searching for her his entire life. "Please," he whispered, his accent foreign yet familiar, like a half-remembered lullaby. "I've traveled across oceans and mountains to find you. My queen." Eleanor's finger hesitated on the trigger. In all her 35 years, through marriage, widowhood, and countless lonely nights on this Montana farm, no one had ever looked at her the way this bleeding stranger did, like she was salvation itself. 3 hours earlier, the blizzard had arrived without warning, the way most troubles did in Eleanor's life. She'd been in the kitchen, kneading dough for tomorrow's bread, when the wind suddenly howled like a wounded animal, rattling the windows of the farmhouse her husband Thomas had built with his own hands 7 years ago. 7 years that felt like a lifetime, especially the last 2, since consumption had taken him, leaving her alone with 200 acres of stubborn land and a mortgage that grew hungrier each month. Eleanor wiped flour from her hands onto her apron, the blue one with tiny yellow flowers that Thomas had bought her at the county fair their first year married. She moved to the window, peering out into the swirling white void that had swallowed her fields. The horses would need extra hay tonight, and the chickens. Lord, she hoped she'd secured the coop properly that morning. Just another storm. "Eleanor," she muttered to herself, a habit she'd developed in the months after Thomas's death, when the silence became too heavy to bear. "You've weathered worse." But as she pulled on Thomas's old work coat, she still couldn't bring herself to call it hers, and wrapped a thick wool scarf around her face. Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that pressed against her chest like a stone. Something was different about tonight. The air itself felt charged, electric, the way it did before lightning struck. The journey to the barn, usually a mere 50 yards, became a battle against nature's fury. Snow and ice pelted her face, finding every gap in her clothing with vicious precision. The wind pushed and pulled, trying to knock her down, spin her around, make her lose her way. But Eleanor knew this path by heart, had walked it thousands of times in darkness, in rain, in sorrow. Her feet found their way, even when her eyes could see nothing but white chaos. The barn door fought her, the wind trying to tear it from her gloved hands, but she managed to slip inside and force it shut behind her. The relative quiet was almost deafening after the storm's roar. She stood for a moment, catching her breath, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness. The familiar smells of hay, leather, and horse wrapped around her like a comfort blanket. "Easy, Buttercup. Easy, Thor," she called to the horses, who were stamping nervously in their stalls. "Just a storm. We've seen plenty, haven't we?" She lit the lantern she kept by the door, its warm glow pushing back the shadows. "First things first, check on the animals. Make sure they had enough food and water to last the night, maybe longer if this blizzard decided to stay." Montana winters were like unwelcome guests. You never knew how long they'd impose upon you. Eleanor had just finished filling Buttercup's water trough when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. A soft groan, barely audible above the wind battering the barn walls. She froze, her hand instinctively moving to the pitchfork leaning against the stall. "Who's there?" Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "This is private property. You're trespassing." Another groan, weaker this time, coming from the far corner where she stored extra hay bales for the winter. Eleanor's mind raced. Could be a vagrant seeking shelter from the storm. Wouldn't be the first time. Could be someone dangerous. Could be an injured animal that had somehow gotten in. She grabbed the pitchfork in one hand, held the lantern high with the other, and moved slowly toward the sound. Her heart hammered against her ribs. But she'd learned long ago that fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when she was alone, not when survival demanded courage she didn't always feel. "I'm armed," she announced, though a pitchfork hardly counted as armed. "Show yourself." The lantern light fell upon a sight that made her breath catch. A man, or what remained of one, lay crumpled against the hay bales. His clothes, though torn and bloodied, were unlike anything she'd seen in Millfield County. The coat was wool, but fine wool, with intricate embroidery along the collar that caught the light. His boots were leather, crafted with a precision that spoke of European cobbles rather than American factories. But it was his face that held her attention. Even beneath the dirt and blood, she could see he was handsome in an almost otherworldly way. High cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard, and dark hair that fell across his forehead. He appeared to be in his early 30s, though pain might have aged him temporarily. His eyes fluttered open as her shadow fell across him, and Eleanor found herself staring into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. Blue like the deep mountain lakes in summer, blue like the sky after a storm had passed. But there was something else in those eyes, something that made her grip the pitchfork tighter. Recognition. Impossible. Inexplicable recognition. "Finally," he whispered, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place. Not quite British, not quite French, something older, more formal. "I found you." "Mister, you're hurt bad," Eleanor said, pushing aside the strange flutter in her stomach. "How did you get in here? Where did you come from?" He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the hay. His hand moved to his side, and when it came away, his palm was dark with blood. They found me in Denver. I've been running. 3 days, maybe 4. I lost count." His eyes found hers again, held them with an intensity that should have frightened her but didn't. "I had to make it here. To you." "You don't know me," Eleanor said firmly, though something deep inside her whispered maybe he does. "You're delirious from blood loss. We need to get you help. I'll ride to town, fetch Doc Harrison." "No!" The word exploded from him with surprising force. He tried to rise again, desperation clear in every line of his body. "No doctors, no town. They'll find me. They'll—" He broke off, coughing, and blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. Eleanor knelt beside him, her practical nature overriding her caution. Whatever else this man might be, he was dying. She could see that plain enough. "Who's they?" "Who's after you?" "Please," he said, his hand finding hers, his skin burning with fever. "I know how this sounds. I know you don't remember, but I do. I remember everything. The promise, the prophecy, the painting. You're not making sense." But even as she said it, Eleanor felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a long-locked door. "What painting?" He fumbled inside his coat, movements clumsy with pain and cold. Finally, he pulled out an oilskin packet, pressed it into her hands with urgency that bordered on desperation. "Look, please, then you'll understand." Eleanor unwrapped the packet carefully, aware of the stranger's eyes watching her every movement. Inside was a small painted portrait, no bigger than her palm, but executed with extraordinary skill. The gold leaf frame was tarnished with age, and the painting itself had the particular quality of something very old, very precious. But it was the subject that made Eleanor's hands begin to shake. The woman in the portrait could have been her twin. Same wheat-colored hair that never quite stayed in its pins. Same green eyes, with gold flecks near the pupils. Same stubborn chin and generous mouth. Even the small scar near the left eyebrow from when she'd fallen from the apple tree at age 7 was there. This isn't possible," Eleanor breathed. "When was this painted?" 1423, the stranger said quietly. 500 years ago. Her name was Eleanor too, Eleanor of Valdavia. She was the queen consort, married to King Gabriel I, my ancestor. He paused, gathering strength. She died protecting the kingdom's greatest treasure, but before she died, she made a prophecy that when the kingdom fell, when the royal line seemed broken beyond repair, she would return. A stranger would find her in a distant land, and she would restore what was lost. Eleanor stood abruptly, the portrait falling to the hay-strewn floor. "You're insane, or I'm dreaming. This is—" She pressed her palms to her temples, trying to make sense of something that defied all logic. "People don't just— History doesn't— I know how it sounds," he said again, and there was something in his voice now, a weariness that spoke of burdens carried too long. "I've spent 3 years searching, following clues in ancient texts, tracking genealogies across continents. 3 years since the revolution destroyed everything. Since they killed my father and brothers, since I escaped with nothing but the royal seal and this portrait." Revolution. Eleanor's practical mind latched onto something concrete. "Where? What kingdom?" "Valdavia. It was a small principality between Austria and Switzerland. We ruled for 6 centuries, until the war changed everything. The people rose up, demanded democracy, and perhaps they were right to do so. But the provisional government that took over—" He closed his eyes, pain that had nothing to do with his wounds crossing his features. "They became worse than anything my family ever was. They're systematically destroying our history, our culture, anyone with even a drop of royal blood." Eleanor retrieved the portrait, studying it again in the lantern light. The woman's expression was serene but sad, as if she knew her image would outlive her by centuries. "And you think I'm— what, her reincarnation?" "I don't know what I think," he admitted, and the honesty in his voice surprised her. "I only know that when I saw your image in a newspaper photograph 6 months ago, you were in the background at the Millfield County Fair, selling pies to raise money for the church. I knew I had to find you. The resemblance was too perfect to be coincidence. You came all this way because of a newspaper photograph?" Eleanor couldn't decide if she was more frightened or fascinated. "Crossed an ocean, traveled to Montana in winter, all while being hunted because I look like a 500-year-old painting." He met her gaze steadily. Yes, the simple certainty of that answer shook her more than any elaborate explanation could have. She looked at him again, really looked, and saw things she'd missed before. The way he held himself, even wounded, straight-backed, shoulders square. The fine bones of his face that spoke of generations of careful breeding. The hands that, despite dirt and blood, showed no calluses from farm work or manual labor. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Gabriel," he said. "Gabriel Alexander Maximilian von Valdavia. Though for the past 3 years, I've been Gabriel Marsh, or Gabriel Smith, or whoever I needed to be to stay alive." Eleanor sank down onto a hay bale, suddenly exhausted. "And now you're here, in my barn, bleeding, with men hunting you." "I'm sorry," he said, and she could see he meant it. "I never meant to bring danger to you. I had to know, had to see if the prophecy might be real. If there was any hope of restoring not just the throne, but the true Valdavia. The one that protected its people, that stood for honor and justice." "Fairy tales," Eleanor murmured, but her fingers traced the frame of the portrait. "This is all fairy tales and madness." "Perhaps," Gabriel agreed. "But sometimes, in the darkest storms, fairy tales are all we have to guide us home." As if in response, the wind howled louder, and somewhere in the distance, Eleanor heard something that made her blood run cold, the baying of dogs. Tracking dogs. Gabriel heard it too. His face, already pale from blood loss, went white as bone. "They're here. God in heaven, they've found me. You need to run. Get to your house, lock the doors. Pretend you never saw me." "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor said, surprising herself with her firmness. "You can barely stand, much less fight or run. And I'm not leaving an injured man to be torn apart by dogs and whoever's leading them." She stood, mind racing through options. The root cellar beneath the barn, too obvious. The house, too far in this storm, and he'd leave a blood trail. The old well house collapsed last spring. Then she remembered. "Can you ride?" she asked urgently. Perhaps. Not far. You won't need to go far." Eleanor moved to Thor's stall, began saddling the big draft horse with practiced efficiency. "There's an old mine shaft about a quarter-mile north, played out decades ago. The entrance is hidden by brambles now. If I can get you there, you'd do that for a stranger. A mad stranger who's brought killers to your door." Eleanor paused, her hand on Thor's bridle. Why was she doing this? The sensible thing would be to turn him over, let the law, or whoever was chasing him, deal with him. She had her own survival to think about, a farm that needed her, debts that wouldn't pay themselves. But when she looked at him, something in her chest twisted. Maybe it was the painting, the impossible resemblance to a long-dead queen. Maybe it was the way he'd said her name like it was a prayer. Or maybe it was simply that she'd been alone so long. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone need her. "Thomas always said I was too soft-hearted for my own good," she said finally. "Come on, Your Highness, or whoever you are. Let's get you hidden before those dogs get here." Together, they managed to get Gabriel onto Thor's broad back, though the effort left him gasping and near fainting. Eleanor swung up behind him, one arm around his waist to keep him steady, the other holding the reins. She could feel the heat of his fever through his wet clothes. He could smell the copper tang of blood. "Thank you," he whispered as she urged Thor toward the barn door. "Don't thank me yet," Eleanor replied grimly. "We're not safe yet." She pushed open the barn door, and the storm hit them like a physical force. Thor whinnied in protest, but responded to Eleanor's firm hand, plunging into the white void. The wind screamed, the snow blinded them, but Eleanor knew this land like she knew her own heartbeat. Every rise, every dip, every landmark, even in a blizzard. Behind them, the baying grew closer. Gabriel slumped against her, his consciousness fading in and out. "Eleanor," he mumbled, and she wasn't sure if he was talking to her or the woman in the painting. "The seal in my coat. If something happens, don't let them have it." "Nothing's going to happen," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. "Hold on, we're almost there." The quarter-mile felt like 10 in the storm. Every second, Eleanor expected to hear gunshots, to feel Gabriel torn from her arms. But finally, the shadowy bulk of the hill that held the old mine appeared through the snow. She half-carried, half-dragged Gabriel through the brambles, their thorns tearing at her clothes and skin. The mine entrance was narrow, partially collapsed, but still passable. She pushed Gabriel inside, then went back. For Thor, leading him to a cluster of pines that would provide some shelter and tying his reins loosely so he could break free if needed. When she returned to the mine, Gabriel was unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. Eleanor pulled off her coat, wrapped it around him, and tried to staunch the bleeding from his side. The wound looked like a knife or bayonet had caught him, deep but clean, missing the vital organs by inches. The baying was very close now. Eleanor could see lights bobbing through the trees, lanterns or torches. How many men? 3? 5 more? She made a decision that would have shocked the Eleanor of this morning. The Eleanor who thought her biggest problem was a mortgage payment. She pulled Thomas's rifle from where she'd strapped it to Thor's saddle and checked that it was loaded. Then she walked back toward the barn, away from the mine, making sure to leave clear tracks in the snow, let them follow her. Let them think Gabriel had sought shelter in the obvious place. She'd lead them on a chase through the storm, buy him time to rest, to heal, maybe to escape when the weather cleared. As she walked through the blinding snow, Eleanor thought about the portrait, about the sad-eyed queen who died protecting something precious. She thought about prophecies and fairy tales, about strange recognitions and impossible coincidences, but mostly she thought about the way Gabriel had looked at her, not like she was a lonely widow on a failing farm, but like she was someone worth crossing oceans to find. The dogs burst from the tree line, massive shapes in the swirling white, but they pulled up short when they saw her standing there with the rifle raised. "That's far enough," Eleanor called out to the men following the dogs. "This is private property and you're trespassing." 3 men emerged from the storm, and Eleanor's heart sank. These weren't local law enforcement. Their coats were military style, their faces hard and foreign. The one in the lead, tall and scarred, smiled at her with no warmth at all. "Good evening, madam," he said in accented English. "We're looking for a fugitive, a dangerous man who may have sought shelter here. Have you seen anyone?" Eleanor kept the rifle steady, though her hands wanted to shake. "Nobody here but me and my animals, and I'd like to keep it that way." The scarred man took a step closer. "This man is a criminal, wanted for treason and murder. He's clever, persuasive. He might have told you stories, made you believe." "Mister, the only story I'm interested in is the one where you and your dogs get off my land before I start shooting." "You would protect a stranger? Risk your life for someone you don't even know?" Eleanor thought of Gabriel's blue eyes, of the portrait of a queen who shared her face, of the strange certainty that her life had just taken a turn toward something extraordinary. "I'm protecting my property," she said firmly. "And my right to decide who's welcome on it." "You're not. Leave now." The scarred man studied her for a long moment. Then he made a gesture, and one of the other men raised his rifle toward her. Eleanor didn't flinch. "You shoot me, you'll bring the whole county down on your heads." "This is Montana, sir. We take care of our own." "Search the barn," the scarred man ordered his companions. To Eleanor, he said, "If we find him here, things will go very badly for you." "Search away," Eleanor replied, praying they wouldn't notice Thor's tracks leading toward the mine, praying the storm would hide the blood trail. "But you'd better be quick about it. This blizzard's getting worse, and the road back to town will be impassable soon." The wait was agony. Every second she expected to hear shouts of discovery, gunshots, Gabriel's death cry. But after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the men emerged from the barn empty-handed. The scarred man's eyes bored into hers. "If he comes here, if you see him, you should know. He's not what he seems. The stories he tells, the things he makes you believe, it's all lies. He's the last of a corrupt bloodline that oppressed people for centuries. Don't be fooled by his charm." "I'll keep that in mind," Eleanor said steadily. "Now get off my land." They left finally, disappearing into the storm with their dogs. Eleanor waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then waited another 10 minutes to be sure, before she lowered the rifle and let herself shake. When she returned to the mine, Gabriel was conscious, his eyes reflecting the light of her lantern. "You came back," he whispered. Wonder in his voice. "Don't read too much into it," Eleanor said, but her voice was gentle. "I just don't like bullies with guns telling me what to do on my own land." She knelt beside him, checking his wound. The bleeding had slowed, but he needed proper medical attention, warmth, food, medicine, none of which she could provide in an abandoned mine shaft. "They'll be watching the house now," Gabriel said, reading her thoughts. "You can't take me there." "No," Eleanor agreed. "But I know somewhere else. Can you make it another mile?" He nodded, though she could see the effort it took just to sit up. This time she took them deeper into the hills, to a cabin Thomas had built for hunting season, their 2nd year of marriage. It was rough but solid, with a wood stove and supplies laid by. No one else knew about it. Thomas had liked his solitude when he hunted. By the time she got Gabriel inside and a fire started, dawn was breaking grey and bitter through the storm clouds. He collapsed on the narrow cot, shivering uncontrollably despite the growing warmth. Eleanor found the medical supplies she'd stocked here, basic but serviceable. As she cleaned and dressed his wound, Gabriel watched her with those impossible blue eyes. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why help me?" Eleanor paused in her work, considering. "Maybe because I've been sleepwalking through life since Thomas died," she said quietly. "Maybe because your story, crazy as it is the first thing that's made me feel awake in 2 years. Or maybe," she touched the portrait he still clutched, "maybe because sometimes we recognize something in a stranger that we've been looking for our whole lives without knowing it." Gabriel caught her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "I meant what I said in the barn when I first saw you." "You're her," Somehow, some way, you're her. I'm Eleanor Whitfield, she corrected gently. A farmer's widow in Montana. That's all, but even as she said it, she wondered. The portrait was uncanny, and there was something about Gabriel, something that called to a part of her she didn't know existed. Tell me about her, Eleanor said as she finished bandaging his wound. The first Eleanor, the Queen. Gabriel's eyes grew distant. She was remarkable. The histories say she came from nowhere, a minor noble's daughter who caught the king's eye at a harvest festival. But she became the greatest Queen Valdavia ever knew. She established schools for common children, reformed the justice system, convinced the king to limit his own power and give voice to the people. Sounds like quite a woman, Eleanor murmured. She was. But there was always sadness in her, the stories say, as if she knew her time was limited. When the neighboring kingdom invaded, she led the defense of the capital while the king was away with the army. She held the walls for 7 days, with just the palace guard and citizen volunteers. What happened? She died, Gabriel said simply, but not before hiding the Valdavian seal, the symbol of rightful rule. She told her lady-in-waiting that it would remain hidden until the rightful queen returned to claim it. Then she spoke the prophecy I told you about. Eleanor stood, pacing to the small window. The storm was beginning to break, and weak sunlight filtered through the clouds. And you think I'm meant to? What, help you reclaim your throne? Become a queen? Gabriel, I don't even know which fork to use at a fancy dinner. I don't know what you're meant to do, Gabriel admitted. I only know that finding you feels like the first right thing that's happened since my world fell apart. She turned to look at him. This prince in exile, this stranger who'd upended her quiet life in a single night. He was pale, wounded, possibly delusional. He was also the most compelling man she'd ever met, with a story that should be impossible, but somehow felt true. Rest now, she said softly. We'll figure out what comes next when you're stronger. As Gabriel's eyes closed, his breathing evening into sleep, he whispered something that made Eleanor's heart skip. My queen. The fever came that night, as Eleanor had feared it would. She'd stayed in the hunting cabin through the day, melting snow for water, keeping the fire stoked, watching Gabriel drift in and out of restless sleep. But as darkness fell and the storm finally began to truly die, his skin grew burning hot, and he began to mutter in languages she didn't recognize. German, perhaps French, and something else, something that sounded older, more formal. Alexandra, nein. Papa, wo bist du? The blood, so much blood on the throne. Eleanor bathed his forehead with cold cloths, tried to get him to drink willow bark tea, but he thrashed and fought her, lost in whatever nightmares the fever had brought. Once he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength, his eyes wide but unseeing. Don't let them burn the library, he pleaded in English. 500 years of knowledge. The manuscripts. Please, Eleanor, save them. Shh, she soothed, gently prying his fingers loose. The books are safe. Everything's safe. He calmed at her voice, seeming to recognize it even in his delirium. His hand found hers again, but gently this time, holding it like an anchor. Stay, he whispered. Don't leave me alone in the dark. I won't, Eleanor promised. And meant it. She sat beside him through the long night holding his hand, singing the old songs her mother had taught her. Folk songs about mountains and rivers, about love found and lost, about home. Sometimes Gabriel would quiet, listening. Other times he'd join in, humming melodies she didn't know, but that somehow harmonized perfectly with hers. Around midnight, his fever spiked dangerously high. Eleanor knew she needed medicine. Proper supplies, but she couldn't leave him. And she certainly couldn't go to town. Dr. Harrison would ask too many questions, and those men with their dogs might still be watching. Then she remembered. Old Martha Crowfoot, the Blackfoot woman who lived in a cabin 2 miles north. She knew herbs, healing ways that predated any medical school. And more importantly, she knew how to keep secrets. Eleanor wrapped Gabriel in every blanket she could find, stoked the fire high, and left him with a whispered promise to return. Thor was where she'd left him, patient and steady despite the long, cold night. She rode hard through the snow, her mind churning with worry. Martha's cabin glowed warmly in the darkness, smoke rising from the chimney. Before Eleanor could even dismount, the door opened, and Martha stood silhouetted against the firelight, a small, ancient woman with eyes that seemed to see everything. "Eleanor Whitfield," Martha said in her quiet, measured way. "You bring trouble on the wind." "I need help," Eleanor said simply. "Someone's hurt, fevered. I can't explain. No need." Martha was already gathering things, dried herbs, roots, small bottles of tincture. "The spirits told me someone would come tonight. A man who carries the weight of fallen kings." Eleanor stared at her. "How could you possibly know?" Martha smiled, her weathered face crinkling. "I'm old, child. Old enough to remember stories my grandmother told about a queen who looked like you, who would return when the world needed her most." She handed Eleanor a leather pouch. "Brew this as tea every 4 hours. This," she added a small bottle, "for the wound to prevent infection. And this," a third container, "when the shadows in his mind grow too dark." "Martha, I don't understand any of this." "Queens and prophecies and—" The old woman touched Eleanor's cheek gently. "Understanding comes with time. For now, trust. Trust what your heart tells you, not what your mind insists must be true." She paused, her expression growing serious. "The men who hunt him, they came here yesterday, asking questions. They'll return. You cannot stay at the hunting cabin." "Then where?" "The old Whitfield place. Your husband's grandfather's homestead, up on Eagle's Roost. No one's been there in 20 years, but the house still stands. Take him there. I'll send word when it's safe." Eleanor wanted to ask more questions, how Martha knew about the pursuers, what she meant about spirits and fallen kings, but Gabriel needed her. She took the medicines, pressed Martha's hand in gratitude, and rode back through the lifting darkness. She found Gabriel worse than she'd left him, burning and delirious, calling out names she didn't recognize. With effort, she got some of Martha's tea into him, applied the salve to his wound. Within an hour, his fever began to break, his breathing eased. By dawn, he was sleeping peacefully, and Eleanor could finally think clearly about what Martha had said. The old Whitfield place, she'd only been there once, shortly after she and Thomas married. His grandfather, Jonas Whitfield, had built it in the 1870s, but abandoned it after his wife died in childbirth. Thomas had talked about fixing it up someday, but someday had never come. Getting Gabriel there would be a challenge. It was 5 miles up into the mountains, along paths that were barely trails, even in good weather. But if those men were still searching, Gabriel woke as she was planning, his blue eyes clear for the first time since the fever started. "Eleanor?" His voice was hoarse, weak. "You're still here. Where else would I be?" She helped him sit up, offered him water. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by horses, but alive thanks to you." He looked around the cabin, taking in their situation. "We can't stay here." "No," Eleanor agreed. "I know somewhere we can go." "But Gabriel—" She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "I need to know the truth. All of it. Who those men are. Why they're hunting you. What this seal you mentioned really means." Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, and Eleanor could see him weighing trust against survival, truth against safety. "My name, as I told you, is Gabriel Alexander Maximilian von Valdavia," he began finally. "Until 3 years ago I was Crown Prince of Valdavia, a small but prosperous kingdom that had existed since the Holy Roman Empire. My family ruled for 6 centuries, not always perfectly, but with honor, trying to balance tradition with progress." He paused, gathering strength. "The Great War changed everything. We remained neutral, but the chaos that followed, the Spanish flu, the economic collapse, it all took its toll. My father, King Maximilian, tried to modernize, to give more power to the parliament, but it wasn't enough. Or perhaps it was too much, too fast. The nationalist movement rose, promising prosperity, order, a return to glory. They staged a coup while I was studying in England. Your family, dead, all of them. My parents, my 2 brothers, my sister Anna, she was only 16. His voice cracked slightly. "I was at Oxford when it happened, finishing my degree in history. Ironic, isn't it? Studying the past while my present was being destroyed." Eleanor reached for his hand, offering silent comfort. The nationalists declared the monarchy abolished, but they knew as long as one royal heir lived, they'd never be secure. So they've hunted me. 3 years of running, hiding, watching them destroy everything my family built. They've burned libraries, demolished monuments, rewritten history to make us monsters. The men last night, they're nationalist agents. The secret police, yes, led by Colonel Caspar Draven, the scarred man you met. He was once my father's most trusted general. Gabriel's jaw tightened. He personally executed my brother Michael. Eleanor felt sick. And this seal? Gabriel reached inside his coat, pulling out something wrapped in oilcloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing an object that took Eleanor's breath away. It was a seal made of gold and rubies, about the size of her palm, incredibly intricate. The central design showed a phoenix rising from flames, surrounded by words in Latin. Even in the dim cabin light, it seemed to glow with inner fire. The Valdavian royal seal, Gabriel said softly. Legend says it was blessed by the Pope in 1423, the year the first Eleanor became queen. Only the rightful ruler can wield it. Without it, no decree is legal, no succession valid. It's why they hunt me so desperately. As long as I have this, their government is technically illegitimate. But surely after 3 years, the people are beginning to see what the nationalists really are. There have been protests, resistance movements. If I could return, if I could prove my identity and rally the loyalists. He trailed off, then laughed bitterly. Listen to me. Talking like I have an army, like I'm not just a wounded exile hiding in a Montana cabin. Eleanor studied the seal, then looked at Gabriel. You came here to the middle of nowhere because of a photograph and a prophecy. That's either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've ever heard. Perhaps both. He rewrapped the seal carefully. But when everything else is lost, sometimes faith in the impossible is all that remains. Eleanor stood, mind made up. We need to move today. Can you ride? If my life depends on it? Yes, it does. Both our lives. They prepared quickly. Eleanor packed what supplies she could. Food, medicine, ammunition for Thomas's rifle. She helped Gabriel onto Thor, then mounted Buttercup, the mare she'd retrieved from the barn at first light when she'd gone to gather supplies. The journey to Eagle's Roost was treacherous. The old trail was overgrown, blocked in places by fallen trees, made more dangerous by the snow and ice. Twice, Gabriel nearly fell from the saddle, his strength failing. But each time Eleanor steadied him, encouraged him, refused to let him give up. Tell me about Thomas, Gabriel said during one rest, trying to distract himself from the pain. You loved him very much. It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. I did. He was a good man. Kind, steady, practical. Everything a farmer's wife could want. But, Eleanor looked at him sharply. What makes you think there's a but? The way you speak of him. With affection and respect, but not passion. She was quiet for a moment, considering. No one had ever asked her about this. The secret she'd carried even through Thomas's illness and death. I loved him, she said finally. But I wasn't in love with him. Not the way the songs describe it, not the way that makes you feel like you can't breathe when they're gone. We were partners, friends. We built a life together. It should have been enough. Should have been? Sometimes late at night I'd wonder what it would be like. To love someone so much it consumed you. To be willing to cross oceans for them. To give up everything. She laughed softly. Foolish dreams for a practical woman. Gabriel reached over, touched her hand briefly. Not foolish. Never foolish. They reached Eagle's Roost as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The old house sat on a natural shelf of rock, overlooking the valley below. It was smaller than Eleanor remembered, and showed its 20 years of abandonment. Broken windows, a partially collapsed porch, vines growing through gaps in the walls. But the main structure was sound, the stone chimney intact, and most importantly, it was hidden, defensible, forgotten. Home sweet home, Eleanor said with forced cheer. It took them 3 days to make it livable. 3 days of Eleanor working while Gabriel recovered, clearing debris, patching the worst holes, getting the ancient wood stove functioning. She made trips back to her farm at night, gathering more supplies, checking on the animals, maintaining the pretense that she was still there. On the third night, she found a note nailed to her barn door. "We know you're hiding him. Surrender the pretender and you will not be harmed. Continue this foolishness and you will share his fate. You have 3 days to decide. KD." Eleanor burned the note and said nothing to Gabriel. That night, as they sat by the fire in the restored main room of the old house, Gabriel told her more about Valdavia, about festivals and traditions, about the palace with its 100 rooms and magnificent gardens, about the people who'd served his family for generations. "My nursemaid, Greta, used to tell me the story of Queen Eleanor every night," he said. "How she could speak to birds, how flowers bloomed where she walked, how she knew the name of every citizen in the capital." "Fairy tales," Eleanor said, but fondly. "Perhaps. But Greta also told me about the Queen's sacrifice. How when the enemy broke through the gates, she stood alone in the throne room, the seal in her hands. She spoke words in a language no one understood, and the seal vanished. The enemy searched for days, but never found it. Only years later did it reappear, hidden in a place only the rightful heir would know to look." "Where?" Gabriel smiled. "Inside a music box that played the Queen's favorite song. A lullaby about coming home," Eleanor's breath caught. "I know that song. My grandmother sang it to me. She said her grandmother taught it to her, brought it from the old country." She began to hum, and Gabriel's eyes widened. "That's it. That's the melody. How could you possibly—" "My maiden name," Eleanor said slowly, pieces clicking together in her mind. "Before I married Thomas. It was Alder, but my grandmother said it was changed at Ellis Island. The original was—" She closed her eyes, trying to remember. "Oldenburg. She said we were from Austria or near there." Gabriel gripped her hands. "Eleanor, the first Queen Eleanor's family name was von Aldenburg. She was from a minor noble family that served the Valdavian court." The weight of it settled over Eleanor like a mantle. Not reincarnation, but blood. Actual traceable blood connection across 5 centuries and thousands of miles. "That's impossible," she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. The portrait, the song, the strange sense of recognition, it all made terrible. "Wonderful sense. You're not just her mirror," Gabriel said urgently. "You're her descendant." The prophecy wasn't about mystical return. It was about family. Blood calling to blood across time. Eleanor stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, snow was falling again, gentle this time, like a blessing. "This changes nothing. I'm still a farmer's widow. I don't know how to be a queen, how to restore a kingdom. I don't even know if I believe—" She was cut off by the sound of horses approaching. Many horses. Gabriel was on his feet instantly, despite his still-healing wound, reaching for the rifle. "They found us," he said grimly. Eleanor looked out the window and counted at least a dozen men surrounding the house. Colonel Draven sat at their head, no longer pretending to be anything but what he was, a soldier, a hunter, a killer. "Gabriel von Valdavia," Draven called out, his voice carrying clearly through the cold air. "You are surrounded. Surrender yourself and the seal, and I give you my word, you'll receive a fair trial." "Your word." Gabriel laughed bitterly. "Your word meant something once, Caspar. Before you murdered my family. They were casualties of revolution. You could have been too, but you ran. Always running, little prince. But no more. Come out or we'll burn you out." Eleanor made a decision that came from somewhere deeper than thought, older than reason. She picked up the seal from where Gabriel had left it on the table, feeling its weight, its warmth. "Stay here," she told Gabriel. "Eleanor—" No, but she was already stepping out onto the ruined porch, the seal visible in her hands. The soldiers raised their rifles, but Draven held up a hand. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said with mock courtesy. "You've caused us considerable trouble." "Colonel Draven," she replied, surprised by her own calm. "You're trespassing. Again. I think you'll find property rights matter little when harboring enemies of the state." "Whose state?" Eleanor asked. "A government built on murder? A revolution that burns books and destroys history?" She held up the seal. "You want this? The symbol of legitimate rule? Give it to me and you can walk away." "This isn't your fight," Eleanor laughed. And it wasn't her laugh. It was older, fiercer, the laugh of a woman who'd held castle walls against impossible odds. "You're wrong, Colonel. This has always been my fight. I just didn't know it until now." She pressed her thumb to the center of the seal where the phoenix's heart would be, and spoke words she shouldn't know in a language she'd never learned. Per ignem et sanguinem, per fidem et honorem, ego sum regina, ego sum Valdavia. Through fire and blood, through faith and honor, I am queen. I am Valdavia. The seal flared with light, not the gentle glow Gabriel had described, but brilliant blazing light that made the soldiers' horses rear and scream. Eleanor felt heat race through her veins, felt memories that weren't quite hers flooding her mind. Castle halls and throne rooms, crown weight and sword grip. The first Eleanor's final moment standing against an invading army. When the light faded, Eleanor stood transformed. Not physically, she was still herself, still wearing her simple dress and worn boots. But something fundamental had changed. The seal in her hands no longer felt foreign, but familiar, like a piece of herself, returned after long absence. "You have no authority here," she said to Dreven, and her voice carried absolute certainty. "You are trespassers in my realm, murderers who've perverted justice. Leave now, or face the consequences." Dreven's face had gone pale, but he rallied. "Tricks and theater won't save you. Been prepared to—" He was interrupted by new arrivals. Horses thundering up the trail, but not more soldiers. Martha Crowfoot rode at the head of a group of 20. Local ranchers, farmers, the Blackfoot from the reservation. All armed, all grim-faced. "Evening, Colonel," called out Jim Morrison, who owned the largest ranch in the county. "Heard you were harassing our neighbor. We don't take kindly to that here. This is none of your concern." "See, that's where you're wrong," said another voice. Dr. Harrison, riding up with more townspeople behind him. "Eleanor Whitfield is one of us. You threaten her, you threaten all of us." Eleanor stared in amazement as more and more people arrived. Some she knew well, others were barely acquaintances. But they'd all come, all responded to some call she hadn't made. "You started asking questions in town," Martha said to Dreven. "Started throwing around threats. Did you think we wouldn't notice?" "Wouldn't care." "This is Montana, Colonel. We protect our own." Dreven looked around at the growing crowd, calculating odds. "You don't understand what you're interfering with. International concerns, matters of state." "We understand plenty," Jim Morrison said. "We understand you're not American law. We understand you've been hunting a wounded man and threatening a widow. And we understand you're outnumbered." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Dreven smiled, cold and sharp. "This isn't over. You can't protect them forever. And when we return with proper authority, with more men, remember that you chose this." He turned his horse, and his men followed. They rode away into the darkness, but Eleanor knew he was right. This was far from over. As the townspeople began to disperse, after checking that Eleanor and Gabriel were safe, Martha lingered. "The seal recognized you," she said quietly. "The old magic, the true blood." "I saw it, we all did." "I don't understand any of this," Eleanor confessed. Martha smiled. "Understanding comes with time. But know this, what happened tonight will be known. The story will spread among my people and yours. The Queen has returned, they'll say. Hope lives." After everyone left, Eleanor found Gabriel standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. "The seal," he said slowly. "It's never done that before. Never responded to anyone except the rightful ruler." Eleanor held it out to him, but he didn't take it. "No," he said. "Don't you see? It chose you, not me. You, the descendant of Queen Eleanor, the woman who was meant to find it again." His voice was filled with wonder and something else, something that might have been love. "You're not meant to help me reclaim the throne. You're meant to claim it yourself." "Gabriel, that's absurd. I can't be." He silenced her by kneeling, there in the doorway of the ruined house, in the snow that had started falling again. He took her hand, pressed it to his lips. "My queen," he said, and this time the words weren't desperate or fevered. They were a vow. "I came looking for Eleanor of Valdavia, and I found her." "Found you?" The week following the confrontation with Draven passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. Eleanor continued her daily routines, tending to Gabriel's still-healing wounds, maintaining both the old Whitfield place and making secret runs to her farm. But everything felt different. The seal, which she now wore on a chain beneath her dress, seemed to pulse with warmth against her skin, a constant reminder that her world had fundamentally changed. Gabriel grew stronger each day, and with his returning strength came a determination that both inspired and frightened Eleanor. He spent hours teaching her about Valdavia, its history, its language, its customs. He drew maps from memory, sketched portraits of key nobles who might still be loyal, wrote letter after letter in coded language to contacts across Europe. "You need to understand," he said one evening as they sat by the fire, "Valdavia isn't just a country, it's an idea. For 6 centuries, it stood as a bridge between empires, a place where different cultures could coexist. My family, your family, we weren't conquerors. We were guardians." "Gabriel," Eleanor said gently, "even if all of this is true, even if I am her descendant, I can't just appear after 500 years and claim a throne. The world doesn't work that way anymore, doesn't it?" He pulled out a newspaper he'd gotten from town, pointing to an article. "Look, the nationalist government is falling apart. 3 ministers assassinated by resistance fighters last month. Protests in the capital every day. The people are starving while Draven and his cohorts strip the country of its wealth." Eleanor read the article, a small piece buried on page 7 about unrest in the former kingdom of Valdavia. The international community seemed to be losing patience with the nationalist regime's brutality. "There's something else," Gabriel said, producing a letter that had arrived through Martha Crowfoot's mysterious channels. "This is from Count Friedrich von Stern, my father's cousin. He's been organizing the resistance from Switzerland. He says if we can prove the succession, if we can show the seal responds to the rightful heir, at least half the army would defect to our side." "Our side?" Eleanor stood, pacing to the window. "Gabriel, I'm not a queen. I'm a widow who can barely keep her farm running. I've never led anyone, never made decisions that affected more than myself." Gabriel joined her at the window, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You stood against Draven. You rallied the town to protect us. You made the seal respond when it had been dormant for 3 years in my possession." He turned her to face him. "Eleanor, you have more royal blood in you than I do. The first Eleanor wasn't born to rule either," she learned. "You can too." His hand cupped her cheek, and Eleanor felt that increasingly familiar flutter in her stomach. Over the past week, the attraction between them had grown from a spark to a flame. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every moment of quiet companionship by the fire had deepened the connection. "What if I fail?" she whispered. "Then we fail together," he replied simply. "But I don't think you will. I think you're exactly what Valdavia needs, someone who understands struggle, who knows what it means to work for everything you have." Before Eleanor could respond, they heard horses approaching, moving fast, too fast for a social call. Gabriel grabbed the rifle, but Eleanor recognized the rider. "It's Jim Morrison," she said, opening the door. Jim dismounted in a hurry, his face grim. "Eleanor, Gabriel, you need to know. Federal marshals arrived in town this morning. Real ones, not like those foreign fellows. They're asking questions about you both." Eleanor's heart sank. "Draven? Must be. He's got some kind of official paperwork claiming Gabriel's wanted for murder in 3 countries. They're talking about extradition." Jim paused, looking uncomfortable. "Eleanor, they're also asking about you, about your involvement. Sheriff Barnes is stalling them, but he can't hold them off forever. How long do we have?" Gabriel asked. "Day, maybe 2. Sheriff suggested off the record that you might want to be somewhere else when they come looking." After Jim left, Eleanor and Gabriel sat in heavy silence. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "You should go. Take the seal, get to your cousin in Switzerland. I'll tell them you held me hostage, that I didn't have a choice." "No." Gabriel's voice was firm. "I'm not leaving you. We're in this together now. Gabriel, be practical. If they arrest you, extradite you, Draven will have you killed before you ever see a courtroom. And what about you? You think they'll just let you go? You've been harboring what they consider a fugitive. And more than that." He gestured to where the seal rested beneath her dress. "You're the real threat to them now. The seal chose you." Eleanor wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The moment the seal had responded to her, she'd become part of this story, whether she wanted it or not. That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor walked outside into the cold mountain air. The stars were brilliant, unchanged by the human dramas playing out below them. She found herself thinking about Thomas, wondering what he would make of all this. Practical Thomas, who'd believed in hard work and simple truths. "You'd think I'd lost my mind," she murmured to the stars. "Talking to yourself?" Gabriel's voice came from behind her. "To my late husband, actually." She didn't turn around. Trying to imagine what he'd say about all this, Gabriel moved to stand beside her. "Well, what do you think he'd say?" Eleanor considered. "He'd say I was being foolish, that I should think about the farm, about security, about staying safe." She paused. "But he also used to say that the biggest regrets were the chances not taken." He sounds like a wise man. He was. Just careful. We both were. We built a safe life together. Eleanor finally looked at Gabriel. "I'm beginning to think safe isn't enough anymore." Gabriel took her hand. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. These feelings I have for you, they started before I knew about your bloodline, before the seal responded to you. When I saw your photograph, yes, I saw her face. But when I met you, I saw your spirit. Your courage, your kindness, your strength. I'm not in love with a 500-year-old ghost. I'm falling in love with you." Eleanor's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty. Not even Thomas, whose proposal had been more business arrangement than romance. "Gabriel, I know the timing is impossible. I know I have nothing to offer you except danger and an uncertain future. But Eleanor, when this is over, however it ends, I want you to know that you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope." Eleanor turned to face him fully, her decision made. "Then we face it together, whatever comes." He kissed her then, under the stars, and Eleanor felt something she'd only read about in books, the feeling of coming home to a place she'd never been. When they finally pulled apart, she was breathless and certain. "We'd leave tonight," she said. Together, they packed quickly, taking only essentials. Eleanor left a note for whoever might come looking, saying she'd been coerced, that she'd had no choice. She knew no one would believe it, but it might buy them time. Martha Crowfoot was waiting for them at the crossroads, as if she'd known they'd come. "I have something for you," she said to Eleanor, producing a worn leather journal. "This belonged to my grandmother's grandmother. She was a servant in a great house in the old country before she came here. She kept records, stories." Martha opened it to a marked page. "Look." The entry was dated 1847, written in a mixture of English and what looked like German. But Eleanor could make out enough. The lady came today, the one who looks like the old queen from the portrait. She says the time is not yet right, that the blood must travel far before it can return home. She gave me this to keep safe, said one day someone would come asking. Below the entry was pressed flower, a white rose, perfectly preserved despite its age. The symbol of Valdavian royalty. "Your ancestor knew my ancestor," Martha said simply. "We've been waiting for you, Eleanor Whitfield. Both bloodlines, keeping faith across the centuries." She handed them supplies, food, ammunition, and most surprisingly, forged Canadian papers. "Head north," she advised. "Cross into Canada at the Milk River. From there you can make your way to Montreal, then overseas." "Martha, how did you—" The old woman smiled. "I told you, child. We've been waiting. We've been preparing." The spirits knew this day would come. They rode through the night, avoiding main roads, following paths Eleanor knew from years of living on this land. As dawn broke, they reached the border, an invisible line in an empty landscape, but one that meant everything. "Last chance," Gabriel said. "You can still turn back." Eleanor pulled out the seal, holding it up to the morning light. It caught the sun, blazing like fire. "Do you know what I realized last night? I've been dead for 2 years, going through the motions, existing but not living. You woke me up, Gabriel. This, impossible as it is, woke me up. They crossed into Canada as the sun climbed higher, two fugitives carrying the hopes of a broken kingdom. The journey to Montreal took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of hiding, of looking over their shoulders, of close calls with authorities who might or might not have been looking for them. But also 3 weeks of falling deeper in love, of learning each other's stories, dreams, fears. Gabriel told her about his childhood in the palace, about the weight of being heir to an ancient throne. Eleanor shared her own youth on a small farm in Ohio, about losing her parents young, about meeting Thomas at a church social and thinking contentment was enough. "Were you happy?" Gabriel asked one night as they sheltered in an abandoned barn. "I thought I was," Eleanor replied, "but now I think I was just comfortable. Thomas and I, we were partners, friends, but there was no fire between us, no passion. I told myself that was childish, that real love was quieter, steadier. And now," she looked at him across the small fire they'd risked lighting, "now I know what it feels like to burn." In Montreal, they made contact with Gabriel's network, a surprising mix of exiled nobles, sympathetic merchants, and intelligence operatives from various nations who had their own reasons for wanting the nationalist regime to fall. A safe house was arranged, passage on a freighter to France secured. The night before they were to sail, a telegram arrived that changed everything. "It's from Friedrich," Gabriel said, his face pale as he read. "There's been an uprising in the capital. The people have taken to the streets. The army is divided. Some units have already declared for the restoration. But without clear leadership, without the seal, it'll become a civil war," Eleanor finished. "How many will die?" Thousands. Tens of thousands, maybe." Eleanor stood, pacing the small room. Everything in her wanted to run, to return to Montana, to safety, to the life she knew. But she thought of the portrait of the first Eleanor, of the sadness in those painted eyes. Had she felt this same weight, this terrible responsibility? "There's a faster way than a freighter," she said suddenly. "The Britannia leaves tomorrow, a passenger liner. We could be in England in 6 days, in Valdavia in 8. Eleanor, that's incredibly risky. Passenger manifests are checked, papers scrutinized, then we don't go as passengers." She pulled out the money she'd withdrawn from her bank account before leaving, her entire life savings. "We go as Mr. and Mrs. Oldenburg, minor nobility returning from visiting American relatives. We hide in plain sight." Gabriel stared at her. "You're serious. A week ago you knelt and called me queen. Were you serious then? More serious than I've ever been about anything? Then trust me. Trust that maybe, just maybe, the blood knows what it's doing." They boarded the Britannia as planned. Eleanor in a dress, purchased from Montreal's finest shop, the most expensive thing she'd ever worn, and Gabriel looking every inch the nobleman in a perfectly tailored suit. The seal rested in Eleanor's jewelry box, hidden among lesser pieces. For 3 days, they played their roles perfectly. Eleanor discovered she had a talent for it, for being Lady Oldenburg, for moving through the first-class dining room as if she belonged there. Gabriel taught her to dance properly, and they spent evenings in the ballroom, lost in each other while the Atlantic rolled beneath them. On the 4th day, Colonel Draven walked into the dining room. Eleanor's blood turned to ice, but she kept cutting her fish, kept her expression pleasant. Gabriel's hand found hers under the table. "He hasn't seen us," he murmured. "Stay calm." But Draven was scanning the room, and inevitably his eyes found them. His scarred face split into a cold smile. He walked over, each step measured, predatory. "Your Highness," he said mockingly to Gabriel. "Mrs. Whitfield, or should I say Your Majesty?" Eleanor set down her fork carefully. "Colonel? Fancy meeting you here." "Oh, not so fancy. We've been tracking you since Montreal. Did you really think you could hide on a passenger liner?" "We're not hiding," Eleanor said, surprising herself with her calm. "We're returning to Valdavia, openly. The people are calling for their rightful rulers." Draven laughed. "Rightful? You're an American farm woman playing dress-up. And you," he turned to Gabriel, "you're the last gasp of a dead dynasty." "Perhaps," Eleanor said, "but I have something you need. Something that makes your government illegitimate. She pulled the seal from her evening bag, set it on the white tablecloth where it gleamed in the candlelight. The entire dining room seemed to hold its breath. "Take it," she said. "If you can." Draven reached for it, and the seal flared with that brilliant light Eleanor remembered. He jerked his hand back with a cry of pain, his palm bearing a burn in the shape of a phoenix. "You see," Eleanor said, loud enough for the watching diners to hear. "The seal knows its own. It knows the truth. I am Eleanor von Oldenburg, descendant of Queen Eleanor of Valdavia, and this seal answers to me alone." "Tricks," Draven snarled. "Magnetism, electricity." "Then try again," Eleanor challenged. "In front of all these witnesses." Draven looked around the dining room, at the wealthy passengers, the ship's officers, the several individuals who were clearly intelligence agents of various nations. All watching, all waiting. "This isn't over," he said quietly, dangerously. "No," Eleanor agreed. "It's just beginning." That night, as they stood on deck watching the stars, Gabriel took Eleanor in his arms. "You were magnificent," he said. "Every inch a queen." "I was terrified," she admitted. "But something Martha said keeps coming back to me, about trusting what your heart knows over what your mind insists must be true. My mind says this is impossible. But my heart—" She looked up at him. "My heart says I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." "Eleanor," Gabriel said seriously, "when we reach Valdavia, if we succeed, you'll be queen. Not queen consort, but queen regnant. The throne is yours by blood and by the seal's choosing. I need you to understand that. And you? What will you be?" "Whatever you want me to be. Your advisor, your general, your friend." He paused. "Your husband, if you'll have me." Eleanor's heart stopped. "Gabriel, I know it's too soon. I know we should wait until the crisis is over, until we know if we'll even survive. But Eleanor, I need you to know, I don't want the throne. I never truly did. I accepted it as duty, but you were born for it, even if you were born 5,000 miles away. And I want to stand beside you, not as king, but as the man who loves you. You're proposing? Now? On a ship in the middle of the Atlantic with an assassin probably planning our deaths?" "I'm proposing always," Gabriel said simply. "Every day from now until you say yes." Eleanor kissed him, pouring all her answer into it. When they broke apart, she was crying and laughing simultaneously. "Thomas proposed in his barn," she said. "Very properly, very formally, with a business plan for how our farms would prosper together. This is rather different. Is that a yes? Ask me again when we're not about to attempt overthrowing a government." 2 days later, they saw the coast of France, and beyond it, their destiny. The train journey from Calais to the Valdavian border took 18 hours. 18 hours of tension, of watching for Draven's agents, of Eleanor practicing phrases in Valdavian that Gabriel taught her. "The language is dying," he said sadly. "The nationalists banned it from schools, from official use. In another generation it might be gone entirely. Then we'll bring it back," Eleanor said firmly. Every word, every song, every story. At the border they found chaos. Refugees fleeing the fighting, soldiers who didn't know which side they were on anymore, and remarkably, a delegation waiting for them. Count Friedrich von Stern looked like an older, wearier version of Gabriel. His eyes widened when he saw Eleanor. "My God," he breathed. "The resemblance. It's uncanny, Count," Eleanor said in carefully practiced Valdavian. "I am Eleanor von Oldenburg, and I have come home." Friedrich knelt, and one by one the men with him followed suit. "The capital is in chaos," Friedrich reported as they traveled in his armored car. "The nationalists hold the government buildings, but the people control the streets. The army is split nearly in half. If we can reach the palace, if we can show them the seal responds to you, we'll need more than that," Eleanor said. "We'll need to give them hope, a vision of what Valdavia could be." They reached the capital at dawn, the city wreathed in smoke from scattered fires. The streets were barricaded, opposing forces facing each other in tense standoffs. "The palace is held by royalist forces," Friedrich explained. "But it's surrounded by nationalist troops. We'll have to—" Eleanor stood up through the car's sunroof, the seal in her hands. "Eleanor, no!" Gabriel tried to pull her down, but she shook him off. "People of Valdavia." She called out in the language Gabriel had taught her. "I am Eleanor von Aldenburg, descendant of your lost queen, and I have returned." She held the seal high, and it blazed with light. Not the harsh glare it had produced against Draven, but a warm, golden glow like sunrise. The fighting stopped. Soldiers on both sides turned to stare. "For 600 years, my family, our family, has served this land," Eleanor continued, switching to English but knowing translators would carry her words. "Not as conquerors, but as guardians. The first, Eleanor gave her life defending this city, this people. I offer mine now, not to rule over you, but to serve alongside you." He cupped her face in his hands. "Because Valdavia doesn't need two rulers. It needs you. You're the one the seal chose, the one the people believe in. You're the miracle, Eleanor. I'm just the man lucky enough to love you. That's not true. It is. And I'm at peace with it. My father ruled because he was born to it. You'll rule because you were chosen for it, by fate, by blood, by the seal itself. I'll be your advisor, your partner, your husband. But the crown is yours alone, Gabriel. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "someone needs to focus on rebuilding the schools, the libraries, the cultural institutions the nationalists destroyed. I thought I might take that on, if my queen permits." Eleanor kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. "Your queen permits anything that makes you happy. Coronation Day. The cathedral was packed, every seat filled with dignitaries from around the world. But Eleanor had insisted that half the spaces be given to common citizens, chosen by lottery. She walked down the aisle in a gown that mixed traditional Valdavian style with modern simplicity, the phoenix heart burning at her throat. The ceremony was ancient, conducted in old Valdavian, but Eleanor had memorized every word. When the Archbishop asked if she would protect and serve the people of Valdavia, her yes rang clear and true. But just as the crown was about to be placed on her head, the cathedral doors burst open. A young man stood there, wild-eyed, desperate. He was holding a child, a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, clearly very ill. "Please," he called out in Valdavian. "Please, my daughter is dying. The hospitals have no medicine, no supplies. They say it will be weeks before—" He fell to his knees. The child clutched to his chest. "I know I'm not supposed to be here, but you promised. You promised things would be different." Security moved to intercept him, but Eleanor raised her hand. "Stop!" She walked down from the altar, the crown still unworn, and knelt beside the man. The little girl was burning with fever, her breathing labored. "What's her name?" Eleanor asked gently. "Anna. Her name is Anna, like Gabriel's murdered sister." Eleanor felt the weight of that, the weight of all the kingdom's pain. She looked up at the assembled dignitaries, the cameras broadcasting this around the world. "This," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral, "this is why we're here. Not for crowns or ceremonies, but for Anna, for all the Annas who need medicine, food, hope." She turned to the German ambassador. "Ambassador Hoffmann, your country offered medical aid. How quickly can we get antibiotics here?" "With military transport? 6 hours, Your Majesty." "Then make it happen." She turned to the British representative. "Lord Pemberton, you mentioned surplus medical supplies. Can they be redirected here immediately?" "Of course, ma'am." Eleanor stood, still holding the fevered child. "I will not wear a crown while children suffer for lack of basic medicine. This coronation is postponed until—" "No," the voice was Magda's. The old woman pushed through the crowd, fierce and determined. "No, Your Majesty. You wear that crown precisely because children are suffering. You wear it so you have the power to help them." She gestured to the man. "Franz Kellerman. I know him. He's a good man, a carpenter. Lost his wife in the revolution. That little girl is all he has left." Eleanor looked at Franz, at Anna, at the waiting crowd. Isabella's words echoed in her mind. Your moment will come. This was it. The choice between the symbol and the substance, between tradition and necessity. "Then we do both," Eleanor declared. She handed Anna carefully to Gabriel, who cradled the child with infinite gentleness. "Archbishop, continue the ceremony. But let everyone see, this crown means nothing if it doesn't serve the people." As the ancient crown was placed on Eleanor's head, Gabriel stood beside her, holding the sick child. The image, The new queen in her regalia and her prince consort holding a commoner's fevered daughter would become the defining photograph of the new Valdavia. Furthermore, Eleanor announced, still wearing the crown, my first decree as queen, every citizen of Valdavia will have access to basic medical care. Not in a year, not in a month, but starting now. We'll use the palace ballroom as an emergency clinic if we must. The crowd erupted, not in the polite applause of ceremony, but in real, raw emotion. People were crying, cheering, calling out blessings in a dozen languages. Within 2 hours, the palace had been transformed. The ballroom where kings had once danced now held emergency medical stations. Medicine arrived from Germany and Britain. Doctors volunteered from across Europe. Little Anna was among the first treated, antibiotics flowing into her tiny body. Eleanor worked alongside the medical staff, still in her coronation gown, though she'd long since abandoned the crown. Gabriel was beside her, translating, organizing, his princely dignity unchanged by the work. Your Majesty, Friedrich approached, looking harried. The international press is calling this either the most brilliant or most insane thing a monarch has ever done. Gabriel sat beside her, Thomas on his lap with a picture book about phoenixes. Her husband had threads of silver in his dark hair now, laugh lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when they'd met in a barn 5 years ago. Just remembering, Eleanor said. That night you arrived, bleeding and desperate. If someone had told me then that we'd be here, you'd have thought them mad? I'd have thought them cruel to offer such impossible hope. Gabriel shifted Thomas to sit between them and took Eleanor's hand. Yet here we are. Here we are, she agreed. The Parliament had just passed the new constitution Eleanor and Gabriel had helped draft. It enshrined democratic rights while maintaining the constitutional monarchy with clearly defined roles. The crown could propose but not impose, could advise but not command. It was exactly what Eleanor had envisioned, a bridge between old and new. The French president called again, Gabriel mentioned casually, wanting to know our secret. Eleanor laughed. What did you tell him? The truth. That you remember what it's like to be ordinary, that you'd rather wear mud boots in a field hospital than a crown in a palace, that you turn the throne room into a public forum where any citizen can petition the crown directly. That was your idea. You implemented it and sat through 8 hours of petitions last week. Each one mattered, Eleanor said firmly. The farmer needing irrigation help, the teacher wanting books for her school, the war widow seeking pension assistance, they all mattered. Papa, why is Mama a queen? Thomas asked suddenly, looking up from his book. Gabriel and Eleanor exchanged glances. How to explain to a 5-year-old? Because, Eleanor said carefully, sometimes when people are very lost and very sad, they need someone to help them remember how to hope again. That's what queens and kings are supposed to do, help people hope. Is it hard? Very hard, Eleanor admitted. But Papa helps me, and people like Anna's father help, and most importantly, the people help themselves. We just show them they can. Thomas seemed to consider this. When I grow up, can I help people hope too? You already do, Gabriel said, ruffling his son's hair. Every time you share your toys with Anna, every time you help in the kitchen, every time you remember that being a prince means serving, not being served. Later, after the children were in bed, Eleanor and Gabriel walked through the portrait gallery. The common faces now hung beside the royal ones as promised. The first Eleanor's portrait had been moved to a place of honor, facing the throne. Do you ever regret it? Gabriel asked quietly. The life you could have had? Peaceful, quiet, safe? Eleanor considered. She thought of her farm in Montana, probably sold now to cover the debts. She thought of the simple life she'd planned with Thomas, the ordinary dreams of an ordinary woman. No, she said finally, that Eleanor was sleepwalking through life. You woke me up. All of this, woke me up. She turned to face him. Do you regret it? Not taking the crown when it was offered? Never. I found something better than a crown. What? A partner, an equal, the love I never thought I'd find while running for my life. He pulled her close. Eleanor, you gave me back my purpose when I'd lost everything. You gave me a family when mine was murdered. You gave me a kingdom to serve rather than rule. How could I regret that? They kissed in the gallery, surrounded by centuries of history, and Eleanor felt the truth of it. They had saved each other. The lost prince and the lonely widow, finding in each other not just love but purpose, meaning a reason to transform tragedy into triumph. 10 years later, the final scene, the abdication ceremony, was unlike anything Valdavia had ever seen. Eleanor stood before the parliament, the crown on a cushion beside her, Gabriel at her right hand. Thomas, now 15 and tall like his father, stood at her left. Isabella, 12, held 3-year-old Michael, their youngest, named for Gabriel's murdered brother. 10 years ago, Eleanor began, her voice strong and clear, I knelt in a cathedral and accepted this crown. I promised to serve Valdavia until my last breath. Today I fulfill that promise in a way our ancestors never imagined. She looked out at the assembled crowd, not just nobles and politicians, but farmers, teachers, doctors, carpenters. Franz Kellerman was there with Anna, now 20, and Valdavia's youngest member of parliament. Martha Crowfoot's granddaughter had come from Montana, carrying on the connection between two worlds. The monarchy has served its purpose, Eleanor continued. We were the bridge between old and new, between tradition and progress. But bridges are meant to be crossed, not lived upon. Valdavia is ready to walk fully into its future. There were gasps, murmurs, some protests, but Eleanor raised her hand. This is not surrender or failure, this is success. We have built strong democratic institutions. We have an elected parliament that truly represents you. We have schools, hospitals, courts that function without royal decree. You don't need a queen anymore. You need yourselves. She lifted the crown, holding it high. But the phoenix of Valdavia will not die. It will transform, as it always has. The royal family will remain as cultural ambassadors, as keepers of history, as servants without crowns. The palace will become a museum and cultural center open to all. The royal estates will be converted to schools and hospitals. And if the people vote to restore the monarchy, someone called out, then we'll return, Gabriel said, speaking publicly on the matter for the first time, but not as rulers, never again as rulers, only as servants called to serve. Eleanor placed the crown on the cushion, and the weight that left her shoulders was visible to all. Some will call this betrayal of 6 centuries of tradition, she said, but I think the first Eleanor would understand. She stood against an army to protect her people. Today, I stand aside so the people can protect themselves. The vote was scheduled for 1 month later. The people would decide, republic or constitutional monarchy, with strictly ceremonial roles. As the family left the parliament, Thomas caught his mother's arm. Are you sad? He asked, this thoughtful boy who'd grown up watching his parents transform a kingdom. No, Eleanor said, and meant it. I'm proud we did what we came to do. But the prophecy, you were meant to restore the kingdom. We did restore it, Gabriel said, putting his arm around his son. Just not in the way anyone expected. We restored its spirit, its hope, its belief in itself. That night, in their private chambers stripped of royal regalia, Eleanor and Gabriel stood on the balcony where they'd stood so many times before. The city sprawled below, prosperous, peaceful, alive. No regrets? Gabriel asked, as he had before. None, Eleanor answered. We were exactly who Valdavia needed, exactly when they needed us. But now they need to learn they don't need us anymore. And if they vote to keep the ceremonial monarchy, then we'll serve in that way. And if they vote for a republic, we'll serve as private citizens. Either way, we'll serve, Gabriel pulled her close, and Eleanor thought of that night in the barn, the stranger in the storm who'd changed everything. She thought of the first Eleanor, standing alone against an army. She thought of Isabella, writing letters as her world burned. All of them had made their choices, their sacrifices, and all of them had transformed disaster into hope. "I love you," she whispered to Gabriel. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for being findable," he replied. "Thank you for being brave enough to be found."